to suffer, then you are to reign with him.
What can separate me
from the love of Jesus?
Nothing separates me from him.
And we have a promise that says all things. For the good who love him, all things, everything, works for the good of him, and you are if we are to suffer,
then we are to reign with him. What can separate me from the love of
nothing separates me.
Nothing separates me from you.
What can separate me? And many of us have probably heard this song before. Let the poor say I am rich, let the weak say I am strong. But I always wondered, when will we actually be strong? When will I actually be rich? And I realized that I can go to God's word, and my God can speak some things into existence that aren't as though they were. So it's time to speak some things into your existence. It's time to speak prosperity. It's time to speak happiness. It's time to prophesy victory. Help me say this. I've got victory. I shall prosper. No longer shall I be bound. God has made me free. I've got victory. And I shall prosper. No longer shall I be bound. God has made me free. Come on, let's take it up. Said I've got victory. I shall prosper. No longer shall I be bound. God has made me free. I've got victory. Hey, good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. In case you don't know who I am J.T. Harrison II, and I have the privilege and honor to be the lead pastor of the Collide Church here in Strongsville, Ohio, on Cleveland's west side. So you're wondering why we're back as I adjust. There we go. We are back because we are here to continue a conversation about leadership. You tuned in with us last month as we talked about leadership and things that are on the horizon, and especially this one quote, which I'll give it to us again, by Bishop T.D. Jakes, and he said, "All the giants are leaving, and what it seems like is nothing but mere followers and copiers and pretenders who are coming up behind them." There was some pushback to that. Some of the pushback was, well, are we that insignificant? The next generation of leadership, those who are coming up, are we just mere followers? Or do we present a different leadership style? And does that difference scare you? Does the difference frighten you? Is it something you're not used to? And are you potentially stepping in and standing in and obstructing the move of God because you're holding on to your own way? So who's right? Who's wrong? Is it both on both sides? I don't know, but that's what we're here to talk about. So we have our wonderful panel again, who's here. I'll introduce them quickly and bring them in. From Killeen, Texas, we have Pastor Ayanna Johnson, her husband, will be joining us very soon. Hey, how you doing?
Hey, what's going on?
Also, we have Reverend Lauren Walden Wallace in the family. Walden Wallace in the house. Reverend Lauren, it's good to see you again. Thank you for joining us again.
Absolutely.
And for now, we have, for now, we have also Reverend Joanna from here in Lakewood, Ohio, on the west side. And if you're watching, and let's say this conversation really touches you, really get your juices going, and you have some comments. That's the one criticism from last time. We didn't take questions from those who watched. So we'll take questions. And if you're watching, I might actually bring you on the call and then have you with us for a moment. So we'll work that out. So having
Yeah, I'm a BW grad too.
oh, I forgot. I'm tripping.
Yeah.
Well, we are Ethics for life. And then Ayanna's wearing yellow. So it's perfect. Let's be here. So JT and the girls and the women and the ladies. Okay, anyway, let's get into it. We already introduced the conversation from last time. So basically, I want to pick up from right there. Is there anything we missed? Anything that we didn't get to express? And if so, let's hit it. And then we'll move into how do we move forward?
Like it or not?
Anyone can take it, anyone can go.
I'm not sure there are things we missed, so let's jump into how we move forward.
There you go. Let's do it. How do we move forward?
I think moving forward, we had looked at the question of, how these giants are passing, and what do we do, and the fact that they weren't really passing down the mantle like we would have liked them to. I think more so now it's a sense of collaboration, of working together. Do we wait for them to die to take place? And the answer will be no. We take our place now. I think there's this underlying thinking that they're the only ones that can reach people. They're the only ones that are going to be able to lead. They're the only ones who can have these platforms. And that's not the case. God has blessed all of us with gifts and talents. I was reading an article how a little girl who is, I believe, 11, who wrote a book to youth of how to make it through the coronavirus in a positive way. And she's doing speaking to various kids in elementary school, and so there is no age limit to this thing. God has called us all to a specific group of people based upon our gifting that He has given us. And so God calls us to work together because He knows that just one person can't reach everybody. And so God needs all of us to work together. I think moving forward, it's learning how to collaborate and learning how to work together without feeling threatened that I'm going to take your members, without feeling threatened that I'm going to outshine you or outdo you. There's healthy competition where, okay, I see what you're doing. I got you. I'm going to up my game as well. There's healthy competition. And then there's unhealthy competition. So we have to learn how to have competition and working together.
Yeah. Oh, one of the points that I thought about a lot from last time was how we talked about how too many clergy either set themselves up or allow their congregation to think of them as kind of almost as if they're the Messiah, that there's this, that the leader of the church is the person we follow, rather than pointing towards the gospel and pointing towards the way of walking in the way of Jesus Christ. And so I think, that question of how do we move forward and how do we seize our opportunity and our moment, I think really needs to come with a mindfulness of not trying to put ourselves up on the pedestal, but of really finding the best, most authentic ways to point towards the gospel. So that really stuck with me from last time.
And I think it might be apropos at this point to share some personal story of conflict. And I would invite all of us, to the degree you're comfortable, to share as I'm thinking about how did I move forward, right? I remember the church I was at, right? I had graduated from seminary in 2013. And most people, I guess in the religious world, would know that, of course, seminary doesn't teach you everything, right? But when you have an MDiv, that tells most churches, here's a person that's ready to lead, and they know how. They've been trained, they've been studied, and they can do that. That is the pastor's degree, or I'm about to go get a PhD in some kind of religion or doctorate ministry. So I have my Master of Divinity, no chip on my shoulder, because a lot of people think like, because you went to seminary, yeah, you learn a lot, but they think like, oh, this arrogant person, they think they know everything. And the truth is, when you're at seminary, you learn so much, it causes you to realize how much you don't know. Yeah. Because you're learning about God so much, you kind of learn how to be like him. So you come out transformed and know you don't have a chip on your shoulder, and no, you don't sit in the congregation and listen to a pastor's sermon and you read along in the original text and critique everything he says. No, that's not what we do. Some do, but I think the majority of us know. So having said all that, let me wrap my story up. 2013, I graduate, and in order to move forward in ministry at this church I was at, you had to go to ministers' classes, do a minister's training. Now I said, well, I've already been to seminary. But before I said that out loud, I said, hey, I'll do it. I'll treat it like Joseph when he was in prison and make the most of it, help everyone else. And so when I was in these ministers' classes, I soon found out that, like, well, one, I could have easily taught the class for the sake of the content. Two, a lot of people in the class were looking to me to help them. And I said, well, I'll do it. Like, I'll help you write your message. I helped almost everyone write their sermons, gave them points, gave them feedback, and all this and all that. Did that for 2 years. And I sensed it wasn't going anywhere. I sensed a glass ceiling. So I needed some of my time back. So I stopped doing it. And the pastor confronts me and says, why did you drop out of ministers' classes? And I said, well, sir, with all due respect, it was kind of remedial and repetitive stuff I've been through already. I have helped everyone in the class because I want to see the word go forth. I want to see the kingdom advance. But, and I kind of needed some time back. Well, seminary doesn't teach you everything. I said, I realized that there's pastors that come up from all over the country, sit at my feet. So who do you think you are? And I'm like, I'm not trying to be rude, but like, I know who I am, and you don't want me to give you an honest answer right now because it'll just offend you more and more. And he goes on to say, well, you're a renegade preacher, and so on like that. Will never preach in my church, never asked. And so saying all that to say, not just to air the laundry, but here's my point. How do I move forward when there is an obvious, not even a glass ceiling? I couldn't even see through that thing. It was cement. And it was literally do it my way, this mold, or gone somewhere else. And we went on to see a few years after that, the answer was gone somewhere else. And I know I can't be the only one that's had a difficulty in moving through ministry with that. So having said that, I wanted to lay that out there. And how do we wrestle with moving forward when there's a lid right on you?
I would say at first there's something to learn within confinement. Every place that God has us is for a reason. So sometimes we feel as if that we're in a place, especially within ministry, where we feel stuck, where we feel as if we can't let our true gifts flourish and grow. And so at that point, we have to take into consideration, God, what is it for you? What is it that you need me to learn within confinement until I get what I need for you to clear up the path for me to move forward? And so, have we learned everything in our position, in our place where we are? My father firmly believes that everything works together for the good. And so, even in the midst of when he was battling cancer, he still said, God has a purpose for this. And so even in the uncomfortable situations that we go through, there's still something to learn. And so now once we have learned that, are we ready to move to the next level that God has us to go?
Yeah, I think in my experience, it's been similar, asking that question, like, I feel like I'm in exile, like what is happening and how do I figure that out and what's my place to learn here? And what I found is serving in a system where my bishop appoints me and I don't necessarily choose where I end up or where I go. There's always something that I've learned. It may not have been what I thought I needed to learn or what I wanted to learn. But certainly there's been some piece of learning and growth there and some refinement of skill sets and some defining of here's where you're called and here's where you're not called. And sometimes that message of here's where you're not called or this isn't the right fit is just as important as here's what the right fit is. And then I found in some respects, I don't necessarily wait for other people to tell me or give me permission to say, go ahead and do this thing that you feel like God is calling you to do. I have a coaching ministry. I coach some folks, clergy colleagues who are going through things in their churches. And that is a wonderful blessing to me. And I hope it's a blessing to the folks who I work with. But I didn't ask permission for that. I just did it because I felt like that was what God was calling me to do. That doesn't mean I'm not still learning and growing in the other places where I serve. But certainly it's part of the story. And I didn't wait for permission for that because it was a really, really clear place where God was saying, here's a gift that you have and you can offer.
I think when you are in a place where you feel like a lid has been placed over you, I think you got to really take a step back and look at what God has called you to do and particularly where God has called you to do it. And that said, for instance, And I'm just going to use this as an example, so even the layperson can understand. Now, at my church, there's a certain standard of being able to sing that you need to have. Okay, if you can't sing, if you sing off key, and you just make joyful noises, you know what I mean? It may be a sweet sound in God's ear, you know what I'm saying? But I know that our minister of music is not going to let you get up there and sing because they don't believe you're equipped to do it or prepared to do it. And they're not going to set themselves up for disappointment and set you up for failure, And so that said, then you may say, well, I know God has given me glorious lungs. And He has given me a glorious voice. And I have been called to sing. And I've seen people that they believe God has called them to sing. I'm like, well, why didn't He give you a gift to use? You know what I mean? And all of that. But I mean, if they believe it, then they believe it. And maybe He did. But here's the thing. Just because people aren't allowing you to do it in their venue or in their setting, that doesn't mean you can't do what God called you to do. If you won't let me preach in your church, I can preach on the radio. I can preach on TV, on the little public access TV if I want to. I can preach on Facebook. I can preach wherever I want to preach if that's what God has called me to do. And I think sometimes we got to make sure that we don't need for our calling to be supplemented by microphones and a certain platform. Hey, if God called you to do it, maybe He called you to be John. You just going to have to go out in the wilderness and you just going to have to do it there and cry loud and spare not out there. You know what I mean? Wherever God has called you to do it, maybe you got to go to nursing homes. Maybe you got to preach in a prison. And if the gift is in you, you can do it anywhere. You know what I mean? Just as easy as a dog can bark, a preacher's got to preach, I mean, so my thing is, never let yourself be limited by that. They won't take the limits off of me. Well, do it somewhere else because there's always somebody who needs to hear the gospel. And I don't care if you go to the mall and you hand out tracts or whatever the case is. Now, some of those things may not be as glorious. They may not be as, you don't get as much fanfare. There's not much to be, there's not much acclaim or recognition or any of that stuff. But at the same time, God sees what you're doing. And you know what? God rewards that. What you do in private, God will reward publicly. You just stay faithful to what God has called you to do. And you can get fired from a job, but you can't get fired from your work. You can't get fired from your purpose. You know what I mean? So just remember that, I think. So be encouraged if you feel like you're boxed in, get out the box. God's got something else that you can do. I like what Reverend Lauren just said. She said, I didn't ask. If I ask God, then hey, you know what I mean? Then hey, if I have to ask if I'm gonna do it at your church, but if I'm not gonna do it at your church, I don't have to ask. And lastly, I would just say, I don't want to be the kind of preacher or pastor or whatever that would be where everything that you ever do ministry-wise has to be done through our church. It doesn't. It doesn't. If God calls you to start a soup kitchen, you can have your own. It doesn't have to have our name on it. God calls you to do whatever. It doesn't have to have our name on it. It's the kingdom being advanced. It's the kingdom growing. He said, upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. But at the same time, He's building the church. We build the kingdom. He's building the church so we can build the kingdom. The church is a tool to build the kingdom. We're so busy trying to build the hammer, trying to build the equipment to build the kingdom instead of building the kingdom. He will supply the equipment. He will supply the church. We take that church and then we build the kingdom. That's what we need to do.
I tell you what, something that someone told me while I was there wrestling with this and going through all of that, right? I'm like, I'm so upset. And a good friend of mine, I'll call his name out, Mark Jackson. Mark T. Jackson told me. He said, Jay, he said, be careful to remember that where you reap isn't always where you've sown. Like you might have sown here for no matter how many years, but a place you may reap is somewhere else. And just to keep an open mind to that. And what I found too, just like John Michael said, and I'm gonna go back to what Lauren said as well. When it's in you, similar to Jeremiah, it's like a burning fire shut up in your bones. You can't keep quiet. You can't come down. Even if you're on the phone talking to somebody, like it comes out. And earlier this, just been a year ago. Wow. No, it was earlier this year. It was this year. 2020 has felt like 15 years. But earlier this year, Pastor Andy Sakura here in Andy Sakura here in Bree, Ohio, told me this. He said, Jay, people like you and I, people who are called to a thing and are led to start a thing, and they're kind of apostolic in that regard, oftentimes we look for permission. He said, and we look for permission, and that's the wrong word that begins with P. We should be looking for partnership. You don't need permission to do something that God told you to do. You need partnership. Not can I do it, but who can come with me to go do it? And that's blessed me ever since.
Yeah. I always love the expression too, the work doesn't care who does it. It's like, it's about doing the work, not about who does it. And sure, yeah, there are moments when I want to get some recognition, but at the end of the day, when it comes to bringing about the kingdom of God, it doesn't matter if I do it or somebody else does it. So I think that's really important.
To that end, let me push the conversation here as we're just flowing.
Sure.
We have 3 women who are in ministry, pastoring, leading, and a couple of things I'll put out there. I'm pretty sure that most people, I don't know what the exact stat is, but are more likely to follow and sit up under a male pastor than they are a female pastor, right? Because there's some that still believe, well, a woman can pastor because she needs to sit on the other side and shut up, cover her hair, and reread 1st, 2nd Timothy again. And then we also know in the same kind of space that when it comes to like diversity, this Christian buzzword that is so underwhelming, I'll come back to that. Diversity, we know that in most spaces, people of color are more likely to go to a church where the pastor is white versus people who are white going to a church where the pastor is black. You'll find more people of color going to places where the pastor is white than you will find white people going to places where the pastor is black. So having said that, and since you all here are women, what has the lid, the ceiling been like with the pushback being women? Because there are still some to this day. I left a Facebook group several months ago because I was tired of like this is not a conversation. They shouldn't even be preaching. I just leave it like there's no transforming you all. You all are stuck here. Bye. I can't. So I know if there was a Facebook of several thousand people who felt that way, it still has to be something you all deal with. So just go ahead and take some time to speak to that if you'd like to.
I don't know who wants to go first. Do you want to go, Ayana?
I'll go. My context is a little different from you ladies. My husband is the senior pastor. And in our denomination, our pastors are appointed. And so in order for me to actually have the title of pastor, I will have to also be appointed as a co-pastor. And it's the challenge that I have and have had with my husband as a senior pastor is getting people to understand me as reverend rather than first lady solidly. Yes, I understand first lady. First of all, I'm only lady. because to say there's a first, it means there's a second and a third and a fourth. But at the same time, I'm Reverend, and I had to explain to one of our members, and she asked the question, why would you rather be called Reverend than First Lady? And I said, because First Lady was something that I was just kind of thrown into because of my husband's occupation. Reverend, I had to work for. Reverend is, yes, God called me to marry a pastor, but also God has called me out individually from being a pastor's wife to minister as well. So I have that dynamic and that challenge. And then I also have with issues of females and female ministers getting pushback from them. Believe it or not, I remember we have a thing, right? My husband is in the pulpit when we're at a new church and we have small kids. I sit with the congregation to kind of scope out the crowd to see who I can leave my child with, and I feel. And then once I found that person, then I'll transition to the pulpit, and one day I had transitioned to the pulpit, and the lady who normally calls herself the individual who's sitting next to the pastor, I just gently removed her bag to the other chair, and I sat down, and she got offended, and I said, I understand, but this is my husband, and I'm a minister, and the place that I need to be is beside him. And so it's learning how to rise above. I'm always educating individuals. I'm always trying to, you're trying to find polite ways to do it. Hey, First Lady. Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate if you would call me Reverend instead. And actually some here have adopted the title Reverend First Lady. I'm okay with that. They just merged the two, but it is a constant battle that we continue to fight, and we continue to inform people in the best way possible. My husband is called, but I'm called as well. The same word that God gives him is the same word that God gives me, and he has given you, and we are empowering you as well. So I'll let the ladies who are senior pastors also here, chime in, but it's a continual thing that we have to kind of step out and do. And it's very important that our spouses are the ones who are strong enough that we are in this position and that they are behind us as well.
Yeah. So for me, I've really had to teach myself and adopt the mentality that people will know who I am by my words and my actions. And the first impression sometimes is rough, but I really try to just live the way that I am, and people will see the ways in which I'm called to this work. Because of that, my hardest moments in ministry are really things like funerals and weddings, where people don't know me that well. So obviously I know the initial family that's there, but there are a lot of guests or, people who haven't seen a female pastor before or haven't stepped foot in a church in years and years, and they are here to memorialize their loved one or friend. And so those are always my most awkward moments. I don't know if you ladies have that too, but I get a whole lot of inappropriate statements about the way I look, a lot of questions about how old I am. I look very young. So I'm 33 this year, which means that I'm the age Jesus was when he died. So I tell people that all the time. I say, well, I'm as old as Jesus was when he died. So that's awful, but also, just a good way of kind of help making light of the awkward situation where people ask me if I'm old enough to be doing this ministry. So there's I really try, just like you said, just kind of trying to be graceful and gentle about people's, to correct people, but also to not be offended by people. So, and then of course, yeah, there is I think all three of us are parents of young children. So, or all three of us ladies, I think all five of us are parents of young children, but, and there's that reality of kind of in a normal, you know, when we're not worshiping remotely, when we walk into the sanctuary and, I have my pastor role and my parent role happening kind of at the same time. And I'm so blessed to have a very supportive husband. He takes a really strong, solid parenting role. But there have been moments, I can think of one where I was about to start a pastoral prayer and I heard my kid hit his head on the pew. I could tell he fell, and I could tell it was the cry of pain, not a whine, you know, so you can tell, oh, that's a whine, they're going to be fine. And you can tell that, oh my gosh, my kid just hurt himself, you know. And I had to take a moment and say, you know, I was about to lead a pastoral prayer, and I had to take a moment to say, I just, my parent mind is interrupting right now. So just hold on a second, you know, and I had to kind of look to my husband to say, you know, make eye contact. Are we okay? And then move forward. So, you know, it's just a very interesting dynamic of kind of the gender roles and parenting roles of this time. So I have a million more things I can say, but I'll let Reverend Lauren speak.
Yeah, I sort of occupy space in between and both and of those things. I am a pastor and a senior pastor of a church, and I am married to a senior pastor of another church in a different denomination. And so we live in these two separate spheres. We have a kiddo who comes with one of us to church. We have been fortunate to have church folks who have taken her when she was very tiny under her wing, and we've been worshiping remotely. So people call her mini pastor now, which is kind of funny. I eagerly anticipate and dread the moment when she comes like running into the sanctuary in the middle of worship for something. But as far as being a female clergy person, there hasn't been a place I've served yet where someone hasn't left because of that. Even before I've arrived, or even, you know, 2 weeks in, you don't know me, I don't know you, we're trying to work this thing out. And I've learned to be okay with that. It's not the thing I chase down. It's not the top priority. People are going to do what people do, and people feel the way that they do. But I've also had the opportunity to engage in conversation with some folks, and to really like walk along this journey with them of, okay, great, let's study those scripture passages and let's have a real conversation. And that requires me to put some of my snarky nature away and to say, let me walk with you and let's have a conversation. And sometimes that's really hard. Sometimes it means putting aside the being offended piece of, you know, I don't think you can do this because you are who you are. And remembering and grounding myself in the fact that God called me, and God called me in as a female person, as the person with the gifts that I have. Some of those conversations have been really fruitful. Some of them have not. And, you know, I'd say at this point, it's probably a 50-50 toss-up. Some of them are fruitful long after the conversation takes place. I had a gentleman who served on our personnel committee who his last word to me before he left the church was, "You're a stupid little girl who doesn't know what she's doing." And he left the church.
Oh. Wow.
Yeah. He was upset. He didn't like the direction things were going. He wasn't happy with me. It was one of my first appointments out of seminary. Of course, I still had things to learn, but stupid little girl isn't how I would describe that.
Oh, wow.
And he left. And 3 years later, he called me and said, "Hey, can we have lunch?" I said, "I don't know how I feel about this, but sure, we can have lunch." So I'm, you know, praying lots of prayers as I go to have lunch with this gentleman. And what ended up happening was a really remarkable conversation and an apology of, I don't know, I was in a really like tough spot. I never should have said what I said to you. And I see now, 3 years later, what you were doing and why it was the right thing. But it's taken me 3 years to get there. And that conversation just blessed me because that you don't always get to see that side of it. So often you get to see the short little interaction, and there's the words that are said, and that's the end of the story. But that piece of the story, I'm glad I was brave enough to say, great, I'll have lunch with you. I don't know that I would do that in every circumstance, but I was glad that God pushed and nudged for me to say yes in that moment.
Wow. Until you do right by me. No. So let me ask this question. And I'll probably compare a lot of things to the plight of being a person of color in the United States, because they're similar, we're on the underhands of privilege. And I'll preface it by saying this. For the most part, people of color, we know when it's racism versus when it's not. You know what I'm saying? Like, we know it's like, no, you got a problem because I'm black. Like, and as much as they might try to deny it, we know because we felt it, we've been there. Having said that, do you think his remarks, and I asked to ask, not to challenge, or because like, oh, it's because I'm a woman, or because he really had an issue with the pastor and he didn't, I don't see color, I don't see woman. Which one do you think it was, if any?
I think it was some of both, honestly. I think it was definitely, you're young and you're new and you're female, and I don't like those things. But also, I don't like what you're doing in this pastoral role. In that particular congregation, we were walking through a church closure process. And so there's a whole mess of grief that goes along with that. And so on this side of things, I see that differently. In the moment, I probably would have told you, oh, it's because I'm a woman. But I think it's a both and.
Yeah. I think you described that really well. I can absolutely tell the difference between when somebody is upset about my gender and when somebody is upset about my actions. And I love when people are upset about my actions, because that means that they respect me enough to challenge my decision making in a collaborative way. But when they're upset about something that I have no control over, that's upsetting. So I'm perfectly happy for somebody to challenge my pastoral decisions. That's fine, but when it feels like it's about gender or age, that's the other thing for me. That's when I get frustrated.
Can I just say something?
Go ahead.
And I'm clearly not a woman, but I just want to say this, man. People will find reasons to disqualify you or say, whatever they want to say. But you know what, though? Like the Bible says, who are you to judge another man's servant? You know what I mean? If whether I'm called or whether a woman is called or anybody else is called, or whether some of us are pretending we're called, we're the ones who got to answer to God about whether we're called or not. We're the ones who know what God said to us or not. And that's up to him to decide how to deal with us. You know what I mean? So that's number one. Number two, I tell you what, if I was sinking and I was at shore and a woman had a raft to give me or something, I for sure would take it. And I wouldn't say because she's a woman and she can't give me a raft. If I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore, I'm going to let this woman give me this raft I need. My mother led me to Christ. My father's a pastor and everything, but my mother, when I was 4 years old, I said, Mama, I want to be saved. And she sat me right on this couch and prayed with me and led me to Christ. And you know what? I mean, I'm thankful for that. Now, what if she said, well, I can't do it till your daddy get home? And you know what I mean? And what if something happened in between then and we got in an accident, we didn't make it or whatever? Not that I would go to hell at 4 years old, but I'm just saying, my mother was very influential in our lives, and I grew up in the Church of God in Christ, which is a Pentecostal organization, and they were just, women can't preach, they can't go in the pulpit, they can't do any of that. They can't preach technically. But what they do is they give them a title of evangelist or missionary. Yeah. And they even preach. And they like, well, they're not preaching, they reaching. What? Okay, yeah, whatever. They can preach better than the rest of y'all, really, to be honest. And most of the churches that were opened by women. They were started by women. I mean, the church I grew up in, they already had built a building before they ever got a pastor. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of them were like that. So and it was such, well, I don't want to get into the history because I don't want to make anybody mad. But I will say this, though. you know, if you don't want a black pastor, a female pastor, or whatever, you know, go get under somebody that you feel like you can listen to or whatever. But I'm gonna shake the dust off my feet if you don't want to listen to the message that God has given me, and I'll go share with somebody who wants to hear. I think that a lot of times people look at some of Paul's letters, and I don't think they really understand what they're reading, and I don't think they understand some of the context there too. But I'll say, you know, if there's any pastors, if you're gonna do this now, if there's any pastors with long hair, you know, that's men. You need to cut that on off then, because that's, you know, you're supposed to wear that. And don't wear everything on your head, you know what I mean? If you got, you know what I mean? If you're gonna do all of it, you know what I'm saying? And you know, it just I would say this, man. Like I said, we answer to God about our call. So I wouldn't let people intimidate me about it. And hey, at the end of the day, I think God's gonna look at it, and there's a soul winner's crown. And I don't think he's gonna care whose head he puts it on, whether it's a female head or a male head. So, you know, people can do what they want to do, but I believe God has called women to do some extraordinary things, from leading nations to, I mean, all the way to birthing the Savior. So
Yeah.
I'm not gonna put women in a box. If you know, if people want to do that, you do what you got to do. But I you know, I think people ought to be careful with that.
Another thing I'd say, okay, just real quick. I was just gonna say that we also have I probably a half dozen kids at the church who have told me that they'd be interested in being a pastor someday, and almost all of them are girls. And I really think that it's that representation, as you know, and can speak a lot more powerfully about as people of color. That idea of being able to see yourself reflected in a position that is really powerful. And I think, like, if we want the church to survive, like, we need those little girls to grow up and do that, you know? So I am so cheering them on and hoping that that happens, and grateful that they see me up there and think I can do that. You know, that can be me next. So and then another quick thing I was thinking while someone was talking too is that before I moved here to Ohio, so I grew up in Ohio, but I served a church in Wisconsin for 6 years, and I did a prison ministry there, and worked with in a medium maximum security men's prison, and they would always acknowledge, a lot of the incarcerated men there would acknowledge that the people who saved them along the way were women, almost always. You know, they'd say, like, I was abandoned by everybody in my life, and it was the women who saved me. You know, it was the women who pulled me back to church. It was the women who got me into school. It was the women who still visit me and write me and call me. And so I think, you know, we know that's not to say men aren't amazing too, but, you know, the power of that support and nurturing is really strong too. So, yeah.
I, like you, when it comes to the faith, was raised by women as well, who I call my pastor and spiritual covering, Pastor Gwendolyn McCurry. It's been women, and I wanted to drop this. This is something I learned myself, and I pride myself. I'll be honest. I pride myself on being aware, being woke of issues of women in ministry and that kind of stuff. I feel like I'm pretty good at it. But every once in a while, something will teach me, like, no, you still have more to learn, and you can never be ahead of a woman when in terms of, you know, being a feminist, or, you know, because like this is, it's really their thing. The best you can do is help and advocate, but you don't get in front of them. So having said that, going back to my pastor and covering, Gwendolyn McCurry, years ago, I learned this. You know, this is a woman. She is about 5 feet tall. Like Raquel just said, one of the greatest leaders in the world. Right? This woman is about 4'11", 5 feet tall. Powerful in the Lord. Oh my goodness! And like when I say a prophet, a prophet, her discernment. I remember one of the first times I went to the church. I was 23 years old. I was looking for a wife. And the Lord had showed me 3 iterations of a wife. You meet a black wife, a mixed wife, and like a Latin someone else's wife. And, you know, you meet them, talk to them, and which one you choose will be your wife. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what he told me and me alone in my prayer. I go to that church one Sunday, and during praise and worship, she just walks the aisle, comes to me, she says, "Sir, I don't mean to be personal, but I see you looking for a wife." I'm like, "Well, of course. I got on this 10-piece suit. I'm trying to be seen." And she says, next, then she says, "I see 3 of them." Now, many people in the church were like, "What do you mean 3? You can't have 3 wives." But I was like, hold on, hold on, because no one knew that but God, because he told me that. Same service, the instrumental, the piano player was struggling to play this song. It was one of my favorite songs at the time. She looks back, she says, "Sir, young man back there, I see a musical gift on you. Could you come play this song?" And I was like, "Actually, I'm looking for a church to play at right now." I came up and played it, and I was her minister of music for the next 5 years. All that to say this: powerful woman, strong, 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 right? And what I realized, I didn't see her as a woman. I saw her as this thing. And it all kind of came to a head for me. It was Valentine's Day. And she's strong. I mean, strong, bold, fierce, will get in your face, but loving as well. Love you, will hug you, cry with you, but not scared of anybody, anything. So she's pretty tough, and I don't ever want to get on her bad side. So it's like, "Well, yes, ma'am. Whatever you say, boss." That was me. Valentine's Day comes, and I get roses for some of the women on the praise team. Ton of roses for, I think we were still dating at the time. For me and Christine, and then you know what? I'm gonna get a couple roses just to be nice, right? For Pastor McCurry as well. And I sat like a small bouquet on her chair. And I'm sitting there playing the keyboard as her, and she walks up, and I'm like, "Please accept my sacrifice. Please, please accept. Please don't be mad at me." And I didn't tell her it was for me. And she gets up there, big, mighty Curry, right? She picks up the flowers, blushes, and like cuddles them on her face, smells them, and we're just on cloud 10. And it was in that moment I was like, "You know what? I know this gets into some, gender roles, but I was like, you're still a woman." And I failed to see like your femininity because you were in ministry. And I wonder how many other men can strip the femininity or the womanhood off a woman because we see her operating in titles and roles and adjectives, assertive, strong, powerful, that we would normally ascribe to men. And are uncomfortable seeing that in women. Therefore, I don't see gender. I just see you. And that was a teaching lesson for me. Can anyone feel what I'm saying right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reverse is also true. When we have male colleagues or male lay folks who are exceptionally good at pastoral care or at those kinds of gifts that are traditionally ascribed to women, the nurturing kinds of things, we strip that away and detach and say, "Oh, he's a really good male pastor who happens to be good at this thing." And, we separate and assign people into their appropriate box. And we lose out then on the gifts that they bring as individuals that God has given them. But we also lose out on the gifts that God has given them and the identities that God has given them that are both important.
Hey,
I want
baby.
to chime in real quick and just listening to everybody and appreciate what everybody is saying and tell you a real quick story. So, very first church that I attended with my family, the first lady was a preacher. Second church that I attended when my father was in the service, first lady was a preacher. We then, my father then retired from Portsmouth, Virginia, and the Coast Guard, went back to Baltimore, Maryland. Back to Bethlehem Church in Baltimore, Maryland, where at the time it was Reverend Dr. John Richard Bryant, now Bishop Bryant, and Reverend Dr. Cecilia Bryant. That's all I knew. And then, of course, I left there, and we went to Waters Amy Church in Baltimore, Maryland. And the first lady was what? A pastor. And she was elsewhere. That's all I've ever known. To the point that when it came time for me to pray specifically for what I wanted, and I don't want to get too much into my business because sometimes you don't know what you want until you test the waters. That's another story. But with me, I prayed, and one of the prayers that I prayed concerning my wife was that I wanted her to be a preacher. Why? Because I feel like that she can push me. I'm very competitive, so I want her to flat foot preach because she's going to help me to do the same. Never in any of those instances did I look at her as well, or any preacher for that sake. Well, you're a good preacher for a female, or you're a good preacher for a woman. No, you are a preacher, one that God has called, and so I embrace you and I applaud you for who you are. It bothers me only because of my history when I hear, well, you know, us brothers, we got to stay together because them women, you know, no. I feel like we ought to embrace the gift in each other while at the same time, as you just said, embracing each other's humanity as well, and to be able to lift each other up. So me personally, that's not an issue. I have issues with hearing others who have issues with either females who are preachers, or because you're too young. I dealt with that at the age of 26. Being a pastor.
He's a baby.
And yeah, I'm a baby. Yeah. And I'm almost 40 in a couple of weeks.
And we're still babies.
And still babies. You know, I'm still a baby. So, you know, but this is dealing with all of that versus, okay, this is the gift that God has given you. How about we celebrate one another, lift each other up, and then let's have fun. The other part of this, and I may switch a little bit of the conversation, it's all right to embrace our humanity. Yes, we are preachers. Yes, we are pastors, but we're human. We like to have fun. We like to be able to just let our hair down, even though I don't have any, in Jesus' name. But, you know, just to be able to just
Imaginary.
right, just to chill, and to be ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, I'm guilty of this. I'm guilty of the fact that before I was a preacher called to preach, I used to hold preachers to a high pedestal because they could do no wrong. I felt like they were the next thing to God until I was called. Then, of course, the game was changed. And then I started seeing behind the scenes what people are really like. And it was really God humbling me to say, listen, at the end of the day, I can use somebody who's messed up, but who's trying to be perfected more than I can use someone who feels like that they're the next thing to God.
Absolutely.
So those are just, you know, my thoughts I wanted to share.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would add to him as well that unfortunately a lot of people can't handle our humanity. That we are human. So we go through human things and human struggles. I remember being in one of my counseling classes, and we were talking about, hey, you know, what do you like to do? What is your focus? What we ultimately like to do? I said, for me, I would love to counsel and be an ear for those who are in leadership, those who are pastors, because they need somebody. Because a lot of times we don't have that circle. We keep to ourselves because everybody can't handle our humanity. I gave the example, you know, if a pastor is having an issue with pornography or infidelity, like he needs to talk with somebody through that. And there was someone in my class, I was like, no, because they shouldn't be doing that because they're the man of God. Man, I was like, okay. And my teacher said, that's why she's called to do that because you can't handle that. And so, yes, we're human, and you know, and it's so important for us to have a circle of like-minded clergy individuals who can understand that we are human, because it's unfortunate that our congregants cannot handle our totality of our humanity.
Yeah.
And just a very quick note, Bishop Carolyn Showell jacks me up every time. I'm done.
Well, I want to put this out there while we're flowing. Great conversation. For those who are watching, hopefully you saw my comment. Hopefully it made it to the page. But if you have a question or a burning thing you want to bring to the forefront that you would like us to raise, please type it in the comments or send it to me, text it to me, and we'll make sure we raise that, okay?
Yeah.
I want to shift here, not to close the door on where we're at right now, but to throw something out there as well. And what I want to get into is, because we're all pastors, we're all preachers. Why church? I want to set it up with this graphic. I want to show you all. And can everyone still hear me? Good. Okay.
Yeah.
So with the picture, and I didn't size it well, but you can see
Yeah, the pictures. Yeah.
clearly it's the people on the airplane, full airplane, masks on, and then the picture below is an empty church, right? And I've heard a number of pastors criticize people during the pandemic and say, well, you can go to Walmart, you can get on a plane, you can go here, but you can't come to the house of God. And when I saw that, I knew that this person was being critical. And I get it too, because, it's facing your bottom line too. I get it. But I had this thought as I look, and I'm going to show you one more time, this picture, and then we're going to talk about why church. I thought about this. At least on the airplane, there's a capable pilot, there's a destination, there's a taking off, and an arrival. At least on the airplane, we're going somewhere. At least on the airplane, you know that whoever is flying that thing has been trained, is ready, has the experience, all this, and knows how to do it. At least on the airplane, we're going to go somewhere. The church might be empty, could I suggest, because where has churches been taking people? Has there been clear destinations? Have we taken off, or are we still taxiing around in the same traditions? Ooh, appreciate it. Are we still taxiing on the runway in the same issues, the same drama, the same women can't be pastors? Have we gone anywhere? Can that pilot get us there? Now we know that God is the control tower. He is the wind. He is the vessel that gets there. He's all things. But I would argue that the pastor is the pilot. And he has to get us there safely and not crash. So at least the plane is going somewhere. But where is church going? So having said that, I want to open the conversation to why church? Why are people coming to church? Why are they not coming to church? What do we need to do? What's the problem? Who's wrong? Who's right? It's wide open. Let's get into it.
Well, I think part of the issue I see, we talked about in our previous conversation last month, was that people want actual content. People want us to actually teach the faith. People want to know the answers to their questions. They want to know that God is real and that God is with them and that it matters what we do. And so much of the time, what we spend the bulk of our time in church on is arguing about this spaghetti dinner that we want to do, or arguing about this thing that we wanted to do that we did 50 years ago and was really great, but we should bring that back. Or arguing about, well, we so-and-so used to do it this way, and if you don't do it that way, it's the wrong way. Rather than recognizing the gifts that God has placed for us now and really doing that discernment work and looking for the mission to say, okay, so it doesn't matter what God calls us to do 3 days ago, let alone 50 years ago. What matters is how we're building kingdom now. and how we're actually teaching faith and how we're actually giving people scripture and teaching folks to do those things so that they become the disciples that we all seek to be. And that building the kingdom is not just the work of the pastor or of the church staff, but the work of the church.
My pastor tells me, and he continues to stress to our congregation, that the pandemic was a blessing because it got us out of our comfort zone of being in those four walls.
Yeah.
It pushes us out to truly do what ministry is about, is to be out in the community, to go to where people are, to learn social media, to get out of your traditions, to get out of those things where your plane may have taken off, but you can't land because you're continuing to circle because you have no true destination. So, it has been great. I'm glad it's empty. Why am I glad it's empty? Because we're the church.
Yeah.
And we are the ones that need to go forth in the community so that we can teach everybody else, other people that God has called to pilot, that God has called to be the stewards and the stewardess of the plane that God is flying to help people and navigate to where they are so that they can get to the destination that God has for them to go. And so if we can just reframe our focus of what the church truly is, it's not a building. We can't know we no longer have the excuse of wanting people to come to us because now we have to go to them.
Yeah.
I was listening.
Yeah, I love that. I've been focusing a lot similarly on how, people are talking about returning to normal. And it's like, I don't want to return to normal. Like what our normal was greed and resentment and injustice and oppression and this capitalism competitiveness that I don't want to return to. So, it's like, let's not go back to normal. Let's figure out what we can do in this season to drive us forward into a new season. And why church? I mean, I have always felt that being spiritual is deep in who we are. It is deep in the human condition and what makes up humanity. And there are a lot of other things that distract us that we think temporarily are fixes to the world. But at the end of the day, that spirituality is at our core. And so I think that when we're faced with these types of crises, we're reminded that the endless shopping on Amazon and the competition with our neighbor isn't saving us, but our spiritual connection and relationship with God and relationship with our neighbors is saving us. And so I am praying so hard that is what we are learning in this season, that that those temporary fixes aren't fixing us, but that church and our relationship with God is going to continue to restore us.
I would just say one thing that I'm noticing that this pandemic has done, and I was just talking to somebody, Reverend Johnson's, about, this is a blessing in so many ways. And I was just on a live yesterday saying how now we're forced to spend time with our families. Like, how many people in the pulpit have been neglecting their families because they're doing ministry and they didn't have time to spend time with their kids, and they didn't have time to spend time with their wives. But this is a time, or their husbands, and this is a time when we can reunite as a family and get on each other's nerves to the point that we finally get back to the basics of loving each other, understanding each other, becoming friends again with our spouses, knowing what our kids are into and what they're not into, finding out their likes and dislikes instead of just telling them what to do and stuff, and just growing. And it takes away a lot of ill motives, because now you're preaching with no audience. There's no amens. You know, there's nobody there's no deacons to say amen. There's nobody throwing whatever money on the altar, hitting you with their handkerchiefs. Preach, brother, preach. There's nobody doing that. I mean, you got to really be preaching from a real sincere place now. It can't be driven by the entertainment part of it. Every praise and worship team and every praise and worship leader, there's nobody to look at with it. See, did you hear me hit that run? Did you hear that? You know, there's nobody to look over at, like, did you hear me play that? No, Doc. Did you hear? There's nobody to do that for. Now we got to do this really for an audience of one, because you don't know what the people out there are looking at. They might be asleep. They just clicked on that thing just so they could say, yeah, I was on, Pastor. I was on. You saw my name come up. You know what I mean? You don't know. But at the same time, there are people that you've never touched before that are watching. There are people that you would never be able to touch across the country that are watching. And I think that you're getting some more of the pure, unadulterated gospel than you've gotten in a long time. Because now, instead of preaching for entertainment and tuning up and all that, now I got to have content. Because there's nobody, you know, there's no organ behind me in a lot of these cases to make what I said sound better. Because you can oh, what, did I hear an organ? See, sound though, you got hoop triggers? What?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Because you can make anything sound good. You know, this Campbell's soup is good. You know what I mean? I mean, we will just make anything sound good. You know what I mean? Preach, Doc. I got my can opener. No, man, look, you got to preach about something real and authentic. And to be honest with you, I think that's the main thing this generation is crying for. Be real, be authentic. We do not want you being all of this pretentious stuff. We don't need that. We don't want that. Just give us the truth, the real, and you know what I mean? I think that will be more attractive than we could ever imagine. So, hey, I think it's a good thing. I agree. I agree with the Reverend Johnson. I agree.
Well, and I think the other thing about the pandemic being a blessing in some ways is that my church currently is worshiping online. That is the safest thing for us to do. There's some pushback and some crankiness about that. And that is also the thing that I see as the most faithful thing that we can do right now, is to love and care about each other and to be good neighbors. And that does mean putting aside some of the things that I think I want. But what it also does is it makes me responsible for my faith in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps me help my people be responsible for their faith in a different way. And so as we're putting together our Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, worship at home kits, as we're inviting folks to come and pick up things or dropping things off to folks who can't make that out, there's some personal responsibility of, I'm not just going to sit here and show up for an hour while pastor preaches and while worship happens. I actually have to pick this thing up. I actually have to open the devotional booklet. I have to go and click on the service. It's not so easy for me anymore. Yeah. And that personal responsibility bears fruit. That personal responsibility and commitment to faith says, you know, I'm responsible for this. And in my house, I'm responsible for this for my kid.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal for some of the younger families and parents. They're teaching kids faith in a way that they never have before. Mm-hmm. And thanks be to God for that.
Right.
Can I just say one more thing? I'm sorry, not set up. You know, Jesus said, you know, my meat is to do the will of my Father. And I always hear people talking about, I'm looking for a word. Yeah, I'm looking for a word. And I jump from this church to that church. I need a pastor with a word and all that. Sometimes you're not getting fed because you're not doing what God called you to do. Mm-hmm. And this is forcing you to be fed by doing the will of the Father and doing what the Father has called you to do. And so sometimes instead of just getting a word and getting fed, it sometimes the things in the kingdom are paradoxical. You know what I mean? It's that if the more we do God's will, that feeds us too. It's not just the pastor feeding you. That's one method of being fed. But Jesus said, my meat is to do the will of the Father. So some of us getting out there and doing something and helping other people and all of that is a way that we need to get fed. We're really fat Christians because all we do is eat. We don't exercise. We don't exercise our faith. We don't exercise any of that. We just come and eat. We just come and eat. And we got to do something sometimes. You know what I mean? And I think that's important. The other thing I'll say is this. Financially, believe it or not, a lot of our churches are doing just as well or better.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know about every church, but my father passed away about a year ago, but I'm still, a trustee for that church. That church has about 15 times what it had before.
Wow.
And I mean, miraculously come back financially. And they were kind of hurting at a certain point, you know what I mean? Because the membership was down. But people have given like never before. And the expenses are down. So what's happening now is whenever we do return back to going, in person, we can do so much more for the kingdom.
Mhm.
Whenever there is, my father was a pastor, whenever there's a replacement, we're equipped to help that pastor get up and rolling instead of saying, hey, man, you're going to have to starve for a few months. You know what I'm saying? No, we're ready to jump right in. And even at the church that I'm at here in Texas,
Mhm.
the same thing. God has been, we have not missed a step. God has been faithful. No one's had to cut payroll. No one's had to do anything like that. And so I just think it's when you look at it, God's used this time to restore families. He's used this time to restore our resources. He's used this time to make us get out of our comfort zones. He's used this time to make us go do ministry and feed and feed off of that and not just get fed because someone else is spoon feeding us. I mean, this really, and even though it doesn't seem like it, maybe this is a time that is a time of blessing too. A lot of times, reaping is great. You know what I mean? But sowing is also a good time too. And if you can't just have it one way all the time. There's going to be some different seasons that come, but you got to be thankful for every season that comes and thankful for knowing what to do in each season. And I just say that to say, if nothing else, this time is a preparation time
Yeah.
to prepare you for what you can do. This is the time you can write a book. This is the time you can stay up all night because you can make your own schedule if you've got a secular job and you can work around the clock whenever you want to. You can start that business you wanted to start. You can do all of those things that you've been meaning to do. You can set your house in order. You can get that trust set up for your kids. You can do all of the different things that you needed to do so that you won't be stir crazy and you won't be running around like a chicken with your head cut off as soon as ministry gets back into that hustle and bustle because you never got enough time in the day to do everything. Get it done now so you can be more used by God then without all of the stress and having to cut through all of that stuff before you can hear from God. Man, this is a time to get clear, get a clean slate. And so I just hope that we're using this time that God has given us wisely because he has definitely given us time to get things in order and prepare for what's coming next. And I really do truly believe that I think a revival is going to come out of this in this nation. I think a lot of times people think and they look at some of the things that have gone on and how bad, people have been at each other's throats politically and all of the vitriol and all of those things. But if there's anything that can bring us back together, if there's anything that can cause people to run back to Jesus, it's trouble. And we've had trouble, but I believe God's going to use out of this trouble to bring us back to him. And so, hey, it may be the great last resurgence before the rapture. Who knows? I don't know. But whatever the case may be, I really do believe God's going to bring revival back in this nation and a hunger like you've never seen before. Sorry, I must have said everything. I didn't mean to say everything. I didn't mean. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Right. I'll piggyback on that. I've said, especially during the summertime, spring and summertime, my strong conviction, and I said this in so many messages, I said we're on the precipice of revival, right? It's right here. And every time historically America is close to breaking through, unfortunately, if we take 2 steps forward, America will typically then take 3 steps backwards. From 1908, William Joseph Seymour, to different times, the Reconstruction and the ending of Reconstruction, the president that came after LBJ, you know, where the movement and the progress stalls, stops, or even sometimes is pushed backwards, right? Even going back to 2016. Yeah, I went there. But what I've always put forth is this. I believe revival is right here, so close. But I also believe that revival in America will not happen until we do, you know, humble yourselves and pray and seek his face. And part of that humility, I believe, in America, not saying the world, but in America, has been our passive treatment of social justice and relations of race and gender and all that stuff. And I firmly believe that we're right there. Now, I'm not saying that everyone has to stop being racist and then we'll have revival. But if the racist person, the sexist person can humble themselves and say, hey, I might have a problem.
Yeah.
Let's sit down and talk. I think through that humbling is where revival can happen.
Yeah.
I believe we had a chance with, you know, Dr. King and Malcolm X, but unfortunately, there was more against them than it was for them.
Yeah.
I think now we're in a time where I'm more optimistic because I've seen Christians of all colors, and especially white Christians, very vocal and not just sympathetic. I feel so bad for you guys, but vocal on those front lines beside us, advocating for civil rights and social justice. So saying what I have to say, kind of move the direction a little bit, but to say I do agree. I think revival is right here, and what I always said when I said that was, I think this time we're going to get it. I think this time it's too many Christians who are pushing in the right direction. I don't think we're going to stall this time. I think it's going to happen, and not because Joe Biden is our president.
Yeah.
You know, let me just kill that right now because somebody on the right is like, well, you know, but because there's too many of us who I think are on the side, on the right side of history.
Yeah.
Which argument one could say we saw that on November 3rd in the days that came afterwards.
Yeah. Well, Dr. King wrote in his letter from a Birmingham jail that he really thought that he'd have the support of the white moderate and the white church, and he was so disappointed to see that he didn't. And he said, you know, that you've hidden behind the anesthetizing security of stained glass windows was the quote. You've hid in there. And I just don't see that happening as much anymore. We have a whole lot of churches who are still hiding. But we have a whole lot of churches who are starting to be able to speak up to justice or for justice. And I think that even goes back to the authenticity piece that has kind of become a little bit of a thread in our conversations too, in terms of when we embrace our authenticity and admit that we are wrestling with these as we go too. That these conversations are things that we're participating in along the way, so that together we're bending the arc of the moral universe towards justice. Is really I too see the hope of the current season. So.
Well, and I think if the church is really going to be the church, then we have to position ourselves in this place of learning. In this place of asking questions, of listening to one another, of being in genuine relationship, not so you who are different from me can teach me, because that's not your job necessarily, but so that I can do the work that I need to do and listen to you and learn from you, and that we partner together to build kingdom. But that means that I'm not always right and that I don't always get it the way that God, you know, wants it to be. And so I have to shut up and I have to listen. And I have to be willing to say, I'm really sorry when I screw it up, because I screw it up a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I throw this out there. And I throw this out there respectfully, because I know there's some people, some baby boomers watching. I found it large in part that I found, and I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, that it seems to be easier for us millennials, Generation X, and even Generation Z to admit when we've been wrong, to admit when we missed it, and to apologize.
Yeah.
Right? Rarely, I got to be careful because my father's watching, but rarely have I seen baby boomers, and I'm talking in large swath, or what's the generation before called? I forgot.
The greatest generation?
Yeah. Rarely have I seen those generations say, "Hey, I was wrong."
Yeah.
Or, "Hey, I apologize."
Yeah.
"Hey, I was wrong for that." Rare.
Yeah.
Rare. So I just wonder, let's deal with that.
Yeah.
And I might know what's going on from the baby boomers.
Yeah. I had a moment recently where I have a 11-year-old neighbor or 10-year-old neighbor, something like that. And I accidentally said something hurtful. I didn't intend it to be hurtful. I said something like, you need to stay away from my kids. And what I meant was social distance, but it sounded as if I was saying, you need to stay away. I don't want you around, And his mom texted me the next day and said, he was just a little kind of caught off guard by what you said. Is everything okay? She was so kind to me about it. And I realized that I hurt him. And the next day I called him over towards me and I said, I'm really sorry. Yesterday I said this and what I meant was this. And I think you might have heard that. And so I hope you know that my intentions were this. And I'm sorry for how that might have come across. And he was so sweet. And, he was like, oh, no problem, whatever. And, but I thought, I don't think I ever had an adult do that to me when I was a kid. I don't think I can't think of a time when I had somebody apologize to me for something that they said. And I do think that that's a generational thing. So I don't know if anybody else sees that too.
Well, I think they bake you a cake. You know what I mean? Like they just come over and get some cake or something like that. They don't say, I'm sorry. You know what I mean? That's like, this is a generation that didn't say I love you. You know what I mean? To the kids. Well, you see, I paid the light bill this month, didn't I? You know what I mean? Like that says I love you. Like, they don't verbalize certain things. Yeah. So,
So I guess it's learning their language, but don't let that kind of stop us from, doing, what God is calling us to do, and still admitting, when we're wrong, because there's power in apologizing to somebody, but also knowing that I can't let someone not apologizing stop me either from moving and progressing forward. I tell a lot of the kids, you got to learn to accept people where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Accept people where they are, but don't let that stop you from who you are, and continue to go forward and move forward with doing what God has called you to do. You do something wrong to them, apologize. If they do something wrong to you and they don't, and they say, here's a slice of cake, that's them apologizing. And so, learning each other's language, we talk about it a lot, especially in premarital counseling and marriage counseling, learning each other's language. When it comes to conflict management, what type of person are you? What type of person are you? And giving each other that space that you need, but still appreciating each other for who you are as an individual.
I'm laughing at that, and then we're going to switch gears. I'm laughing at that because you all are talking to my younger self, who when I say JT would hold on to something, and I would be just like, until you do right by me, until you was wrong, and that's why you can't sleep now. I mean, and even trying to like have an argument with my wife, I wouldn't stop until she said uncle, and she's just as prideful of firstborn. And I learned, about 5 years in, like, boy, if you want what you really want, you better just go on and hush. Just let this one go. So I'm laughing. I'm laughing. Here's what we want to do right now.
I'm also.
Here's what we're gonna do. We're nearing the end of our time. I don't want to keep you guys all night long, but clearly there's more conversations to have, more to unpack on why church, how to get people back to church. What will church look like when the pandemic is over? Are we going to rush back into our churches by the hundreds and thousands? Are we going to be in the streets? So we'll cover that next time. But those who are watching, we want to take at least 1 or 2 questions from our audience. If you all have any questions that you would like to raise, and let's talk about it. Or if you have a question and you want to come on here and ask your question, we have time. We'll make time. I'll send you the link how to get on here real quick. And as we wrap up, but still, we want to have any questions. So we'll give it a moment. If someone has a question or anything that's just burning in your chest that you want to say, we want to hear from our audience. You've heard from us, and we are you, but we want to hear from you. And while we wait, let's do this too. While the questions are coming in, 2 birds with 1 stone. I want everyone on the panel to send me the link to your ministry. Matter of fact, no, let's not even do that. I'm going to let each of you introduce your ministry, put your social media or your church's website down their Facebook page, whatever, so that whoever's been watching can follow you. And hopefully by the time we've done that, we'll have a question or 2 from our audience. We can start with the Johnson family from Killeen, Texas.
Anderson Chapel. That's www.Anderson Chapel, Killeen, KILLEEN.org. Also, we're on YouTube, and that's Anderson Chapel, Killeen, and we are also on Facebook, Anderson Chapel, Killeen. So we would love for you to come and holler at us. As I said before, in this age that we are in, if you don't have a place to worship, and you feel like Anderson Chapel is the place for you, whether you are in California, you are in Ohio, you're in Brazil, come holler at your girl. We would love to be your pastor. Thank you, Pastor JT. I appreciate you, and to everybody, love y'all.
Definitely.
My brother in Dallas, we're gonna have to connect, man.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. I love that.
We're gonna come and say hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I love that. I guess while I'm here, so Down to Earth Dallas, you could on Facebook if you're looking for Down to Earth Ministries, Down to Earth Dallas, and I wrote it on Facebook. I think the link should be there. So God bless you all. Yeah, Texas connection. We got to connect. Yeah, absolutely.
Reverend Lauren.
I'm Lauren Radzik. I serve as the pastor of Rockport United Methodist Church in Rocky River, Ohio, and our website is rockportumc.org. We're also on Facebook and YouTube, similar hashtags and all that kind of good stuff. We would love to have you join us for worship. We typically worship at 10 o'clock. It goes live, but then it's available anytime after that. Thank you, Jay, for having us back with you. It's been a great conversation.
Always, always.
Thanks.
Reverend Joanne.
Yeah, I'm Reverend Joanna D'Agostino. I serve as senior pastor at Lakewood Congregational Church in Lakewood, Ohio. So I sent my YouTube channel. We also have a website, lcc-church.org, but I sent the YouTube channel so you could check out our worship services and our faith formation, which has been really fun for our kids. So yeah, thanks for having us, and I enjoy this a lot.
All right. So I think we have a question. We have two. I think we'll tackle. Then a final thoughts, and we'll get out of here. The question is, and we'll show it now. How do you preserve proven traditions of the past and yet be relevant for today? In other words, preserve the past but pave new paths. Oh, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. And how do we do that?
Mm-hmm.
And that question did come from a baby boomer who I'm the baby he boomed. No.
Mm-hmm. That's
Yeah.
funny. I'll just say real quick, using the Bible as the source of our work, that if we use Scripture as the foundation of why we do what we do, then we're able to call the root of our faith into our future. So that would be my quick answer.
Well, I think our traditions and history matter. They've brought us to this point. And if we look to Scripture as our reference point and our guide, so much of Scripture is a retelling of what happened and how God has been faithful in the past. And we should be doing that now. We should be naming, here's where we've seen God at work in the past, and here's where we hope, and here's where we see, and here's where we prophesy that God is working now. And here's how we're going to get there.
My 2 cents would be, I think while it's important that we look at avenues of preserving tradition, we ought not to get stuck in the preservation of that we miss the open door to shifts and transformations that God is doing right now in this season.
Yeah.
Being a part of the oldest African American denomination, the AME Church, that is where we are at this juncture, where it's critical that while we sing hymns and Are We Yet Alive, see each other's face, same token, how are we going to transform in order that we may remain relevant for present kingdom work? And so pastoring a traditional church before coming here, of course, this is a very contemporary church, but before pastoring a traditional church, sometimes we just need to be careful that we don't give more credence to furniture than we do to the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And I would even add, how do we preserve it and actually, just acknowledge it, come alongside. So find an avenue where we walk together, right? And so we look so much of, this is how we used to do, this is how we used to do, this is how we used to do. Well, okay, that's how we used to do, but now let's find a new way together. There are some, like you said, there's some traditions that need to die. Just like the scripture where, God is pruning us and he's cutting off those dead branches that are not bearing any fruit. If those traditions aren't bearing fruit, we need to cut those off. And we need to find a way walking and working together so that we can be relevant to reach those who could care less about tradition and want to know more about God's word.
On the flip side, and then I'm done, that is, don't get rid of certain traditions, such as, again, I go back to those hymns that have has a theological foundation and power. Don't get rid of those just because of the way that it's been sung. Sometimes the way that it's been sung is no longer necessary, but the message needs to remain the same, and push forward.
I can't add anything to that. That was great. Yeah, I love that.
Man.
I love that.
So what I'll say to that, I love talking about this because I've learned that the best way to honor someone is to, especially honor an older person, older generation, is to keep them included, to do things that honor them. Plus, let's be honest too. Those baby boomers, they were taught the principles of financial stewardship and tithing. They give. They keep our churches open.
Yeah.
Millennials, we come and have a good time, run around, shout, fall out, stay on the phone with you all night long, but we'll put about $5 in there. But those baby boomers, every 1st and 15th, 10%, all they have. They mean it. I've learned this too, and I guess not to have the final word, and we all have good words, but I say, and this is actually in a book I wrote called Hush and Do, shameless plug. Oh my, okay. That you have to remember history, but forget the past. Remember history, forget the past. When I say remember history, I define history as who did it and why. You always remember who did it and why. The past is what did they do and how, because that will always change. The method and what you were accomplishing, that always changes. Why? Because time goes on. So we have to abandon the past, but never forget history. Who did it and why? Because if we keep that, we can apply any modern methodology to it.
That's good.
As we remain cognizant of what we need. Are there any final thoughts before we get out of here? Oh, Sister Sylvia Reeves had a question. I'll throw this out here too. Or a statement I thought was good. When you say you are looking for a revival, what do you want to do that he's not doing now? Elevate our thinking about revival. Matter of fact, I'm sorry, we should start with that.
I was just thinking that. That's a great place to start next time.
Yeah. So, Sister Sylvia, we're gonna come right back to that one. Probably have to have her on.
I just want to say that's Pastor Sylvia Reeves from the Living Faith Church of God in Christ. So she's asked me to teach Bible study this month on Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern. She wanted me to plug that too. So she's one of those ones that they technically call evangelist, but she is indeed a pastor and an awesome pastor. So yeah, I just want to put that out there.
Nice.
Yeah, evangelist, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Not a holy church. We call.
You don't have to break these chains, but it's okay.
So, any final thoughts before we wrap it up? Wonderful conversation again. Thank you for all you all who've tuned in for my lovely panel. This is great, and it's sustenance. Final, unless we've already done final thoughts. I don't know. Last word for the good of the order. Sound like a meeting now.
Stay safe.
And where's the doggone mask? Pastor Sylvia, sorry for missing your title. Yes, God bless you. Thank you. We'll talk to you real soon. All right, guys. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Leadership. I don't anticipate doing this again before Christmas. Well, maybe. I mean, you all let us know. We'll want another one before Christmas on December 22nd. Maybe we can do that. Otherwise, we'll wait till after Christmas, maybe the New Year. But I like where this is going. Maybe we'll get some new panels, new people on, or keep the same flavor, because I think we're doing a wonderful job. The best job ever. The best panel I've ever seen. Before us.
Oh, wow.
Okay, I'm playing too much. This is church. Be serious. I love you all. Have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful night, and we'll talk to you soon, okay?
Bless you all.
God bless you.
Bye.